Welcome to the 21st century literature from the Philippines and the world. On the previous lecture, you have learned about the meaning of the word literature, its geographic, linguistic, and ethnic dimensions, as well as the representative texts and authors from each region of the Philippines. Can you still remember them all? That's awesome! On this video lecture, we will discuss about short story in Philippine literature. This will be the first part of this lecture. And our target goals are to recognize the meaning of short story and to identify its elements. Now, what is a short story? A short story is a piece of fiction that is usually written in prose and is often in narrative format. It may have the same elements as in a novel, but this is much shorter than a novel. Short story writers define their works as artistic and personal expressions, but there are some who may also attempt to defy fixed categorization by genre or fixed formation. Short stories have 6 basic elements: setting, character, plot, conflict, point of view, and theme. Setting is a description of the time and place where the story took place. It is usually directly described by the author. Description of time may include time of day, year, weather conditions, or historical period. Description of place may include geographical location and atmosphere. Other times, you have to figure out setting through story details, such as sounds and smells, or through the speech, and even the manner of dressing of the characters. Next is character. It is a person, or at times an animal, or any being who is involved in the action of the story. Short stories usually have fewer characters compared to a novel, and they usually focus on one central character. There are many ways to categorize the types of characters in a story. It can be by the role they play, by the change that happened to them throughout the story, or by archetypes. The most common types of character, based on the changes that happen to them, are flat and dynamic characters. Flat characters remain the same throughout the story, while dynamic characters change over time in the story. Then we have the plot. Plot is a series of events in a story. The basic plot structure contains the following parts: exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and denouement. Exposition is the beginning of the story, where relevant details about characters and setting are introduced. Rising action is where the conflict is introduced. This sets the characters and action that leads to more exciting events in the story. Climax is the turning point in the story that portrays the ultimate interaction of the character with the conflict. Falling action happens right after the climax. This is where the tension starts to ease down as the story moves towards the resolution. Denouement is a French word that literally means to untie or unknot. Thus, denouement is the final part that concludes the story. This is where loose ends are not and all unanswered questions are resolved. The most cliché ending for a story is the "and they live happily ever after." But stories can either end happily or tragically. The next element of the story is the conflict. This is the heart of the story, since without a problem, there will be no story at all. Conflict is the opposing force that drives the main character towards the surrounding goal of the story. Basically, there are two types of conflict, which are internal and external conflict. Internal conflict is when a character is conflicted with his personal issues or with himself. This is also called man versus self. External conflicts, on the other hand, are conflicts brought by an outside force against the character. This can be another character, which is called man versus man. It can also be the difficult environment or society that the character is in, which is man versus nature or man versus society. The fifth element of the story is the point of view or POV. This shows the perspective of the narrator in the story. The three major POVs are first, second, and third person. First person point of view means that the events are being narrated through the eyes of a character that is telling the story. It can be said that this is the I perspective, since the pronoun I is being used to refer to the narrator of the story. Second person point of view is when the narrator seems to be talking to its readers. This is not commonly used in narrating a story. On the other hand, the third person is the most commonly used perspective of narration in a story. The narrator tells the story like an observer or a spectator, since the narrator is not a character in the story. There are three types of third-person point of view. First is limited. It is when the narrator only tells what unfolds in the story but cannot see through any character's mind. Next is omniscient. The narrator sees all that is happening in the story. And lastly, we have limited omniscient. The narrator can see through only one character's mind. The last element of the story is theme. Every story has a theme around which the plot is woven. The theme expresses a message or a general truth about life. Sometimes, the theme is stated directly, but often it is not, and the reader would still need to infer it. This is the end of the first part of the lecture on short story in Philippine literature. But before you jump in on the second part of this lecture, please read first the short story Dead Stars by Paz Marquez Benitez. Thank you for watching this video lecture.
Happy learning at home with lessons made easy by Olivarian GoTeach. One proud Olivarian.